Yes, Jerry, you're ready.
Okay, hang on. This is the third year of the Poetry Center at Stony Brook, and the reading tonight is by Gerald Stern. The reading is supported by private donations to the Stony Brook Foundation and by Poets and Writers Incorporated. Gerald Stern's published works include the 1977 Lamont Poetry Selection, Lucky Life, and a collection called Rejoicings, Selected Poems 1966 to 1972. His poems have appeared in many magazines, American Poetry Review, Paris Review, and The New Yorker, and a long work was published in a special issue of the Journal of the Rutgers University Library in 1969. He is consultant in literature to the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts. He teaches at Somerset County College in New Jersey and directs the poetry workshop at Lafayette College. You know, introducing poets is not easy. There's one way to bug out of it and to say that this is one of the leading or the best poets in America and all that. But I was rereading Lucky Life today, Gerald Stern's book, and I felt, well, you know, it doesn't need, that hackneyed phrase, it doesn't need any introduction. It's a poetry which amazes me, really, fills me with envy, a poetry of feeling. But that's easy to say, a poetry of feeling. The question is, how do you get it across? How do you find a voice? And the voice, it struck me that he'd found the absolute secret for organizing any large body of work. It's not a mechanical thing. It's a spiritual thing. He found a voice into which everything seems to fall perfectly naturally. But I'll let him read his poems. I won't hold you with this stuff. Gerald Stern.
With this chain ID. Okay, you're taking my book. So, thank you very much, Louis. Thank you very much. This is yours, Louis. Louis, this is yours. Yeah. I will just trust in the technological elements and assume that I'm plugged in up there and giving you an opportunity to adjust your valves and make sure that everything is okay. Jerry, are we okay? Fantastic. And because you wouldn't know this, but I'm reading with a perfectly natural voice, but this isn't my voice. This is a radio you hear. My only problem is a small table, but I'll overcome that in a minute. I thought I would read to you some poems from each of my several publications. I'm not going to do them in any given order. I have to do them in a given order, but I'm not going to do them in a chronological order necessarily. I thought I would start off with reading some poems from Lucky Life, and then some poems from an earlier volume called Rejoicings, and then some recent poems, and see how the time goes and how bored you get. The problem is when you don't have an inexorable grand design to your poetry, when you're not writing 40 poems about the wall hangings in Venetian palaces, or about the goats in Crete, and everything hangs together that-a-way. When you're just writing poems about how you feel about the world from time to time, which are ironically called lyrical poems, because the word lyrical has such a lovely lyrical ring to it, and sometimes it expresses, deep sadness, for example. when you give a reading, look for some organization to inflict upon your own poems for the sake of the reader, the listener, so that he can hang on to something, so that he can have what in French ballistics terms is called a pont d'appui. I'll spell it for you at some point. And so I've often tried to structure individual readings, and I'm sure Louis and other poets here have had this problem. You can do it chronologically or whatever. I've often talked about, since I live in the country, a couple hours away from New York City, but ironically in a weird, isolated pocket, and also spend a lot of time in New York City, I have rural poems and urban poems, and I love to sometimes offer that as a hanger for people to connect with, and that will do, except it's really false, because I view a plant and a car in the same way, quite frankly. I never know when I'm in the country or in the city. When I'm in one place, I'm in the other, and vice versa. So I'll start off by, after this is enough talking, and I'll start off by reading you some New York City poems. This is a group written about the Upper West Side, Broadway, in the area of the Columbia University, 100th Street to 115th Street. I spent many years up there. His first poem is called Let Me Please Look Into My Window, and it is a nostalgic trip back to a place where I once lived on 103rd Street. Clearly, I'm viewed in the poem as a kind of corpse. Let me please look into my window on 103rd Street one more time, without crying, without tearing the satin, without touching the white face, without straightening the tie or crumpling the flower. Let me walk up Broadway, past Zach's, past the Melody Fruit Store, past Stein's Eyes, past the New Moon Inn, past the Olympia. Let me leave quietly by gate 29 and fall asleep as we pull away from the ramp into the tunnel. Let me wake up happy. Let me know where I am. Let me lie still as we turn left, as we cross the water, as we leave the light. There's a little park on 106th Street in Broadway, which is called Strauss Park. Some of you may know that park. At one end, there's some lovely green benches there where one can sit and read and think. Some nice bushes. At one end, a Art Nouveau statue of a statue in iron, a woman with pointed breasts in 1929 German style. And right across the street is an old restaurant, or there used to be an old restaurant called Stanley's Cafeteria. And at a certain point, I was into restaurant poems. I was writing poems about restaurants that I used to love and linger in, and I, believe it or not, just passed this one by accident and discovered this favorite restaurant of mine, boarded up, had been on fire, and the poem follows. It's a description of that and a response to that. The poem's about California. It's called Strauss Park. It's the little park was built and put there by the Strauss family, who owned some department stores in New York. I don't know what they're called. Is there a store called Strauss's in New York? Gimbel's, Macy's? General Motors. It's General Motors. If you know about the Babylonian Jews coming back to their stone houses in Jerusalem, and if you know how Ben Franklin fretted after the fire on Arch Street, and if you yourself go crazy when you walk through the old shell on Stouts Valley Road, then you must know how I felt when I saw Stanley's Cafeteria boarded up and the sale sign out. And if you yourself mourned when you saw the back wall settling and the first floor gone and the stairway gutted, then you must know how I felt when I saw the iron fence and the scaffold and the plastic sheets in the windows. Don't go to California yet. Come with me to Stanley's and spend your life weeping in the small park on 106th Street. Stay with me all night. I will give you breast of lamb with the fat dripping over the edges. I will give you the prophet of balm, making the blood come. Don't go to California with its big rotting sun and its oleanders. I will give you Sappho preparing herself for the wind. I will give you Mussolini sleeping in his chair. I will give you Voltaire walking in the snow. This is the dark green bench where I read Yeats. And that is the fountain where the Deuteronomist sat, with his eyes on the nymph's stomach. I want you to come here one more time before you go to California. I want you to see the Hotel Regent again, and the Edison Theater, and the Cleopatra Fruit Market. Take the iron fence with you when you go into the desert. Take Voltaire and the Deuteronomist and the luscious nymph. Do not burn again for nothing. Do not cry out again in clumsiness and shame. This is another restaurant poem. Those of you who are old enough or young enough or just the right age will remember all these restaurants. Bickford's. There are still Bickford's, but they used to be gentle, lovely, dark places with large seats where men of certain ethnic backgrounds, be it Greek, Italian, or Jewish, would sit reading exotic newspapers in their various languages, and where you could buy a cup of coffee and sit all day. Pity yourself. There was once such a Bickford's on 112th Street. It's now gone, of course. They're now almost fast food stores, which is not to put the present down. I love fast food stores. And this poem is about Bickford's. There is one word in it, for example, that might give you trouble. The word is Shaddai, S-H-A-D-D-A-I. It is one of the manifestations of the Godhead, as they say in the biz, of the Godhead from the Kabbalah, which is a Jewish book of mysticism. It's actually a combined. It's a what is that called when the different religions get together? That is called it's a ecumenical. It's Episcopalian and Jewish. Presbyterian. It's called a Bickford's. You should understand that I use my body now for everything, whereas formerly I kept it away from higher regions. My clothes are in a stack over against the orange pine cupboard, and my hair is lying in little piles on the kitchen floor. I'm finally ready for the happiness I spent my youth arguing and fighting against. 20 years ago, walking on Broadway, I crashed into Shaddai and his eagles. My great specialty was darkness then, and radiant sexual energy. Now, when light drips on me, I walk around without tears. Before long, I'm going to live again on $4 a day in the little blocks between 96th and 116th. I'm going to follow the thin line of obedience between George's Restaurant and Salter's Books. There's just so much feeling left in me for my old ghost, and I will spend it all in one last outburst of charity. I will give him money. I will listen to his poems. I will pity his marriage. After that, I will drift off again to Bickford's and spend my life in the cracked cups and the corn muffins. I will lose half my hatred at the round tables and let any beliefs that want to overtake me. On lucky afternoons, the sun will break through the thick glass and rest like a hand on my forehead. I will sit and read in my chair. I will wave from my window. The last group in this set of New York poems is called 96 Van Dam, which is a street in Soho where I almost lived. Actually, I live at 20. I have an apartment at 26 Van Dam, and I misremembered the address, believe it or not. I'm going to carry my bed into New York City tonight, complete with dangling sheets and ripped blankets. I'm going to push it across 3 dark highways, or coast along under 600,000 faint stars. I want to have it with me so I don't have to beg for too much shelter from my weak and exhausted friends. I want to be as close as possible to my pillow in case a dream or a fantasy should pass by. I want to fall asleep on my own fire escape and wake up dazed and hungry to the sound of garbage grinding in the street below and the smell of coffee cooking in the window above. These country poems, I suppose, have the same language. We'll see in a minute. The subject tends to be a little different. Here's a poem called The Power of Maples, which describes that experience. I'm basically an urban person who moved into the country. I never realized it. If you want to live in the country, you have to understand the power of maples. You have to see them sink their teeth into the roots of the old locusts. You have to see them force the sycamores to gasp for air. You have to see them move their thick hairs into the cellar. And when you cut your great green shad pole, you have to be ready for it to start sprouting in your hands. You have to stick it in the ground like a piece of willow. You have to plant your table under its leaves and begin eating. Here's a poem in 3 parts. At supper, someone said, a friend of my good friend Abby Lettinger, someone said that I attacked once poems that were in sections. I guess I did it at a reading. I've always been very sensitive about, every poet is sensitive about something, starting poems with capital letters or small letters or whatever, and it doesn't mean that he's right. That's just the thing that keeps him going. One of the things that keeps me going is an aversion, which is altogether wrong, I'm sure, for there are many great poems written in that style and order, which divide things like in numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. I've only in my whole life written, in recent years, written one such poem, and I will now read it to you. It's called 3 Tears. 1. If you have seen a single yellow iris standing watch beside the garden, then you have seen the Major General weeping at 4 in the morning in his mother's Bible. And if you have seen the rows and rows of onions, then you have seen the army with its shoes half off and its rifles half stacked and half scattered in the witch hazel. But you who have seen the half-eaten leaves of the hackberry have seen the saddest sight of all, a nest inside a ruined building, a father hugging his child, a Jew in Vilna. 2. You would have to sit at my bedroom window to see the dog of hay guarding the strawberries. He is twice the size of an Irish wolfhound and heavier than a bear. He belongs to the hairy species with the sheepdog and the long-nosed collie. He lies there day after day in the middle of the garden with his paws crossed under his chin and his eyes watching the road. He is so clean-smelling and so peaceful that we forget the strength in his huge body and the malice in his jaws. 3. I have to lie on my back for 2 hours before a certain cloud comes by. Then I only have 3 or 4 good seconds before it disappears again for another day. What would it have been like if there had been no maples and no viburnum to cut off my vision? If I could have lived all year in the sand with nothing to stop me but my own thoughts? If I could have let my eye go freely down the line, choosing its own movement and its own light? This next poem, these are all rural poems. It's called The Sensitive Knife. It is a spring, rebirth, Passover, Easter poem, as many of mine are. Every day the dark blue sky of Brother Van Gogh gets closer and closer. And every day the blue gentians of Brother Lawrence darken my eyes. It is blue wherever I go, walking the towpath, climbing the stone island, swimming the river. And everywhere I sit or kneel, the blue goes through me like a sensitive knife. I am following my own conception now. During the night, I flap my 2-foot wings in the black locusts. I move thoughtfully from branch to branch, always loving the stiffness and shyness of the old giants. I think of my own legs as breaking off, or my wings coming loose in the wind, or my blossoms dropping onto the ground. Across the river, the sticks are coming to life, and Mithras and Moses and Jesus are swaying and bowing in all directions. I swim carefully through the blood and land on my feet on the side of Carpenter's Hill. There on a flat rock, my father is placing the shank bone and the roasted egg on a white napkin. I climb over the rhododendrons and the dead trees to meet him. This is so incredibly serious. I will break it up with one relatively light poem called, in the same group, called Four Sad Poems on the Delaware. I live, except for now, I'm in Pittsburgh now, but ordinarily I live on the Delaware River, which separates New Jersey from Pennsylvania, right on the river, so to speak. And this poem, which is imagistic in the style of certain of the early masters in this century, or mistresses, such as Amy Lowell, John Gould Fletcher, early Ezra Pound, Eliot, and others, is imagistic, deals with physical things in the neighborhood. And these are four plants that happen to grow on the towpath behind my house, mule path. They're each 4 or 5 lines long. 1, the flowering dogwood. This is an old tuxedo shirt, gone a little yellow with age. I open it up and its petals fall into the grass. 2, the wild columbine. This is one of the flower animals. Its head hangs down like a horse's, and its snout waves patiently in the wind. It moves on the rock like the slowest of mollusks, an inch every 100 years. 3, the mayapple. This is a mayapple, living like a socialist in the shade of the towpath. It is one of the machines for living that Le Corbusier designed in the old days. 4, the black locust. This is a locust tree, dying of love, waiting one more time for its flowers to come, regretting its life on the stupid river, growing more and more Jewish as its limbs weaken. On my poor road, there is nothing but a possum and groundhog, the 2 vegetables of the animal kingdom. No skunk, no deer, no beaver, not even a small snake to ruin the balance. Only easy digging and soft chewing and staring at the sky. On my poor road, a man lives like a slug. He rides along the soil like an old wheel, leaving a trail of silver, and makes his home in the wet grass and the flowers. He is finally free of all the other mysteries he had accepted and sees himself suddenly lying there, warm and happy. At night, he drinks his water by the dark stove while the small radio moans, and the heart breaks in two to the words of old songs and the memory of other small radios in other gardens. The last of this group I will read is a poem called Behaving Like a Jew, which requires a very brief introduction, which is as follows, that this poem is the result of a series of synchronistic activities, as Jung would have said. A conversation between some friends of mine, a visit to a hospital, a drive down a country road, the accidental reading of a old Reader's Digest. Two friends of mine, old friends of mine, talking, saying Sterne is an urban poet, meaning he's a Jew. He shouldn't be writing about the country. At least that's how I, in my paranoid version, interpreted it. And B, I was driving my wife to a nearby hospital in Easton, Pennsylvania, to have a growth on her neck removed, which was very minor. It was going to be done in the emergency room. And, but of course, being terrified of emergency rooms and doctors and hospitals and all that stuff, it was the end. I'd have to make my own bed and all that stuff. And C, there was this opossum lying on the road, dead, which I removed from the road in an act of pathetic fallacy. And D, when I got to the hospital and was waiting in the waiting room, there was some old Reader's Digest there. And I started to read one, and it was greasy and dirty and full of heart attacks and diabetes and syphilis, as things are in waiting rooms. And it was an article by Lindbergh, whom you may remember as the Lone Ranger, Eagle, who flew across the ocean all by himself to talk to Hitler. Am I getting my history mixed up a little? And he had a vision of nature which was altogether different than possible other visions of nature. And it's not a bad vision. It is, put simply, and I hope I'm not doing him an injustice, it is a delightful and self-satisfying justification of death, instead of what might be an alternative, which would be a terror or a feeling of remorse. And I'm loading the text, I know, but I'm merely giving a background to the poem. When I was 4 years old, I had a Lindy hat. Came like that and like that. And I used to, anytime when I was a kid, when we'd hear airplanes in the sky, we would look up and wonder. I still do when I'm driving near the Newark airport. I look up thinking, my God, it still hasn't happened. That is, one of these planes has not yet crashed into another plane, into a car, on Route 22. So behaving like a Jew. When I got there, the dead opossum looked like an enormous baby sleeping on the road. It took me only a few seconds, just seeing him there, with a hole in his back and the wind blowing through his hair, to get back again into my animal sorrow. I'm sick of the country, the blood-stained bumpers, the stiff hairs sticking out of the grills, the slimy highways, the heavy birds refusing to move. I'm sick of the spirit of Lindbergh over everything, that joy in death, that philosophical understanding of carnage, that concentration on the species. I'm going to be unappeased at the opossum's death. I'm going to behave like a Jew and touch his face and stare into his eyes, pull him off the road. I'm not going to stand in a wet ditch with the Toyotas and the Chevys passing over me at 60 miles an hour and praise the beauty and the balance and lose myself in the immortal life stream when my hands are still a little shaky from his stiffness and his bulk, and my eyes are still weak and misty from his round belly and his curved fingers and his black whiskers and his little dancing feet. I'll read about 3 or 4 more poems from this book. Gert's Gifts. This is a poem about Florida, an early walk in Florida, Miami, in the morning. There were 2 jokes played on me on my first long walk in Florida this winter. The English muffin joke and the foam rubber joke. Nothing else fooled me. None of the grotesqueries and combinations, not even the driftwood tree growing fresh purple flowers on its green tips. It's good to be back in Florida where the dead things bloom, where the sea grapes drop leather leaves in the sand, and the sawgrass grows through the cracked cement, and the sweet honeys walk by on silk platforms, promising luxury and renewal in the green darkness. I went to Greece 2 summers ago and wrote some poems there, which I was just happy that I discovered later I was able to take off of my taxes because it was a sabbatical and I was doing work and stuff like that. And I wrote a bunch of poems there, but all the poems tend to be about America. Most of them do. I'll read 2 of those. One is called The Cemetery of Orange Trees in Crete, and the other is called If You Forget the Germans. The first poem was written very hurriedly on a bus trip in a manner which I very seldom write. I mean, this was written just in a notebook. This is the way it came out first, more or less, first writing, as opposed to working over the poem. It was a long bus trip before a long walk, 4-hour walk, down to the Libyan Sea. In Crete, the old orange trees are cut back until they are stumps, with little leaves coming out again from the butchered arms. They are painted white and stand there in long, straight rows, like the white gravestones at Gettysburg and Manassas. I first came across them on the bus ride to Omelos as we began our climb through the empty mountains, thinking of the beauty and exhaustion that lay ahead. They are mementos of my journey south, the renewal of my youth, green leaves growing out of my neck, my shoulders flowering again with small blossoms, my body painted white, my hands joining the other hands on the hill, my white heart remembering the violence and sorrow that gave us our life again. And the second Greek poem is called If You Forget the Germans. And it's about New Brunswick, New Jersey. I don't know if anybody here knows that area. It's not too different, I suppose, from places on Long Island. Or is it Long Island? And it was written, the subject is the Acropolis, the nominal subject. If you forget the Germans climbing up and down the Acropolis, then I will forget the poet falling through his rotten floor in New Brunswick. And if you stop telling me about your civilization in 1400 BC, then I will stop telling you about mine in 1750 and 1820 and 1935. And if you stop throwing your old walls and your stone stairs at me, then I will drop my overstuffed chairs and my rusty scooters. Here is an old leather shoe to look at. Give me anything, a pebble from the Agora, a tile from Phaestus. And here's a perfectly intact bottle of Bolo. Give me a delicate red poppy or a purple thistle growing beside the Parthenon. Here are the photographs. Myself crawling out on the charred beam, a carton of Salem's, a crib with mattress, a pigeon feather, a plywood door, a piece of the blue sky, a bottle of Smirnoff's, a bottle of Seagram's, a bottle of Night Train Express. Show me yours, the oldest theater in Europe, a woman playing the harp, a marble foot, a bronze frying pan, a fish swimming in crystal, a boar's tusk helmet, a god screaming, a painted eyelid. Here are the thoughts I have had. Here are the people I have talked to and worn out. Here are the stops in my throat. Here's the ocean throwing up dead crabs and card tables. If you go by bus, take the suburban transit and get off if you can before the Highland Park Bridge. If you go by car, take Route 18 East past the Riverview Bar and try to park on either Peace or Church. If you walk, go north on Church past the old Gramercy and the health food store and God's Deliverance Center to the mound of dirt and the broken telephone booth. Do not bury yourself outright in the litter. Walk gently over the broken glass. Admire the pictures on the upstairs rear wall. Sing and cry and kiss in the ruined dining room in front of the mirror, in the plush car seat. A 1949 or 50, still clean and perfect under the black dust and the newspapers, as it was when we cruised back and forth all night looking for happiness, as it was when we lay down and loved in the old darkness. Two more from this book and I'll finish. Is that what I said? Four? And one is called, well, I'll do something else, 82, 83. Okay. It's a poem about two short poems. How am I doing? What time did I start?
You're doing fine.
Okay, fine. I don't want to overdo my... Okay. This poem is called The Sweetness of Life. And there are two short ones I want to read here. One is called The Sweetness of Life, and the other is called Underground Dancing. The Sweetness of Life is a short poem about mushrooms. You all know the mushroom theory. You learned it in History of Civilization, that the origin of religion is mushrooms, right? The cross and the, what is that called? The cross and the mushroom? That book that Ezekiel, the thing that Ezekiel ate was a mushroom, that roll he put in his mouth. And from the mushroom came all wisdom, knowledge, inspiration, the breathing in of God's voice, the Holy Ghost, Shekinah, and so on. I have a friend who teaches this quite literally. He's an ex-Catholic getting revenge on his youth. As some of you may be familiar with that root. And the poem, his name is Kevin Riley. He's a marvelous guy, and this is a kind of a nostalgic poem about him. It's called The Sweetness of Life. After the heavy rain, we were able to tell about the mushrooms. Which ones made us sick? Which ones had the dry bitterness? Which ones caused stomach pains and dizziness and hallucinations? It was the beginning of religion again on the river. All the battles and ecstasies and persecutions taking place beside the hackberries and the fallen locust. I sat there like a lunatic, weeping, raving, standing on my head, living in 3 and 4 and 5 places at once. I sat there letting the wild and domestic combine, finally accepting the sweetness of life on my own mushy log in the white and spotted moonlight. And this other poem that is called Underground Dancing is a poem that I wrote about 1.5 years ago or so when I was laid up with a very bad back and thought I was going to be forever invalid, and actually started to read with appreciation. The spirit can change so fast. About the fact that in California, if you have a bad back, after 6 months, you can get a permanent disability. And I was thinking of throwing away that poem, Strauss Park, and taking the iron fence with me to California. And it wouldn't be so bad. I'd have time to write, I said. And I thought, I've been writing one miserable poem after another. It was very, very, very cold. And I decided to write a happy poem. And I called everybody up to my bedroom and said, listen, I've written a happy poem. It's called Underground Dancing. And there was a tree out the window, an old crippled birch tree that my wife who had put balls of fat, the way one does, balls of fat for birds to eat. You know about that, right? So that they will get heart attacks. Anyway, it's called Underground Dancing. There's a bird pecking at the fat. There's a dead tree covered with snow. There's a truck dropping cinders on the slippery highway. There's life in my backyard. Black wings beating on the branches, greedy eyes watching, mouths screaming and fighting over the greasy ball. There's a mole singing, hallelujah. Close the rotten doors. Let everyone go blind. Let everyone be buried in his own litter. What was that poem you wanted? The One Thing in Life. That's from this book. The One Thing in Life. The One Thing in Life. Okay. The One Thing in Life. I'll find it. That's funny. I can't find it. I will in a second. Here. The One Thing in Life. 23. Thank you very much, Louis. Actually, there are 2 poems I wrote, and I would like to. One is in this book, and they are definition poems, so to speak. That is, they are poems which describe, at least as I see it, though I may be exaggerating it, what it is